I've been trying to make this video for quite some time. I don't know why, but it's just been very difficult for me to do. And I thought, you know what I could probably do to start this off? Is just talk about my experience with this RMI piano that is at the heart of a setup that I'm rather awkwardly calling the German setup, which I'll explain in due time. But yeah, the RMI came into my possession from a musician here in Nashville called Shannon Sanders, amazing musician. He was musical director for India RE, amongst other things. Just one of those sort of real lifers. By that I mean just like he's always going to make music. It's in his bones. Crazy keyboard player, just nuts. When I went to buy the instrument, I think it was really cheap, like $200 or something. He kind of demoed it. And I was there with my wife, and the two of us just looked at each other and we were like, what? He was like Donny Hathaway, just like crushing and just singing. And I was just like, what? Unreal. So that's the kind of the beginning of the story with the RMI, which is pretty sweet in itself. It is a clunker. I tell you what, it's a beast, this instrument. And I did really kind of get it initially because I've always loved the music of Sun Ra, and it's such a prominent sound in that music. And I later discovered that it was being used by like the Beach Boys and Rick Wakeman and just all manner of other people. And it makes sense because it has a crazy charm to it. There's something about it. It's in a way chintzy, but in another way with effects. It just opens into quite a beautiful and sort of unique world. And I'll be honest, sort of not forgotten about the RMI, but it was sort of left in storage for quite some time, partly because it's so massive. One day, not so long ago, I was turned on to the music of Roedelius and his solo works, these sort of self-portrait albums, and more recently an album called 90, which just came out because he's 90 years old, which is unbelievable, still playing gigs. I mean, yeah, quite an incredible guy. A lot of it had the tone that sounded so familiar to me. I was like, it's like an RMI. But I know it's not an RMI because he, like Erman Schmidt of Cannes, was playing the Farfisa Professional Piano, and that's the sound. And it's related, but the professional piano is a little sweeter and it has more power. It's a slightly more advanced instrument, but the RMI has its own charm. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is the weird bridge between Sun Ra and, that German 70s sound that I also love very much. So hence the German setup, because it's kind of like a little nod to Roedelius, Harmonia and all those guys. The music is so good. So the RMI's core sound is pretty simple. This is the piano sound. Harpsichord. Lute. And let's not forget about organ mode. Now, organ mode really changes the power of this instrument. It does have a sustain pedal, but the keys do die away quite quickly. They're supposed to emulate things like harpsichords and pianos, which have quite a quick decay. So in organ mode, as you'd imagine, they don't decay quite so much. They actually do decay, which is quite weird. They don't just hold forever. So it's not quite an organ, but it's definitely more organ-y. Here's the RMI without the organ mode engaged. The note is already on the way out. Organ mode engaged. It's sustaining, so it's very useful. We can play completely different things. Adding a volume pedal, of course, you have a lot more options. These tuning pots here are used to tune each individual key. It's pretty crazy. Using this sort of makeshift setup, I've attached a tuner to the machine. No note is quite the same as any other. Some bend up and then come down. Some go up only. It's quite good. It's kind of out. Adding effects, as I mentioned, is really key to getting the RMI to sing. Let's have a listen to my particular chain in this case. There's a Mutron Phasor into a Moog murf, which has a lot of sliders for essentially a graphic EQ, which is good for kind of getting more nasal tones and just generally shaping the sound before it goes on to a looper. In this case, the Strymon Volante, doing sound on sound, and then the Echofix tape delay, like a kind of, space echo at the end of the whole thing, which is good to just add a little bit of that kind of flavor, which is very important to the music of Roedelius. As I realized, there's so much kind of long delay play going on where he'll set up phrases. I almost feel like in order to keep time to do his overdubbing, the delays were really almost like a metronome. They could kind of keep you locked. That's actually a really crazy discipline to play with delay. I kind of love that. So anyway, that's the effects chain, and it kind of sounds like this. Oftentimes in these kind of jams, I'll set up a kind of drone essentially on the Panoptigon and just let it kind of move thanks to the wellspring and its additional kind of animation. And it just provides this amazing bed for stuff. Turning it on. Hey, it's a lot quieter than the Orchestron. And we're going to send it some MIDI notes that are going to sustain thanks to the loop op +3. Now that's going to just effectively hold these notes. Putting it into manual mode allows a lot more dramatic pitch changes that are kind of free, off the grid. This is my favorite way of using the machine. You kind of just use your ear to tune it in, and the wellspring takes care of the tone. Effectively, I'll just use these 3 knobs most of the time. This is the output volume, this is the wetness of the reverb, and this is the wetness of the modulating BBD delays. So this is our dry signal. Let's send it some reverb. And now some of the delay. Starting over. I just love it. So the MS20, I know, was used a lot by Roedelius. It's a keyboard that kind of will sit on the shelf, I'll be honest, for a long time. I've got the full-size one, the old one, obviously. And yeah, just sometimes it's just not what I want. But luckily, I kind of almost forget just how versatile and how powerful and like just how lovely it is as a synth. So the sound sources are there, you've heard the effects, and there's a couple of missing pieces. The Otari 5050 tape loop, which is my old Otari 5050 with pitch control, is set up and can do some pretty nice things in this setup. I've worked out how to use the voltage block to essentially send like stored pitches to the machine. They are not perfect. They don't really tune chromatically, but they're pretty in a ballpark. So I'm going to set it record. It's going, and I'm just going to play in some notes from the Panoptigon just to feed it. You'll see me go to the voltage block here, and you'll hear roughly chromatic pitches that it provides. What we can do is try to add on top of this now and effectively overdub. Put in record again. The Cocoquantus is key to this setup, I would say. It became an absolutely massive part of just adding a noisy nastiness to things. So many of my favorite jams on this system have come from essentially distortion, like pushing the level of the RMI into the auxpander. I actually have the output of the RMI going into a little preamp on the floor, so I can kind of juice it a bit before it hits the auxpander, so we kind of like saturate it essentially. And so that starts the chain reaction of distortion, because its tone is distorted, and then the distorted tone gets fed into effects and so on and so on. And the whole body of sound starts to just kind of go down that road and get like hypercharged. And it's kind of like the best sound this kind of setup can make, I think, because it starts to become just really visceral and kind of wild. I love it. I'm not the best rhythmic player on keyboards. I'm not a good keyboard player in general. So unfortunately, the RMI really demands quite a lot of discipline, especially if you're doing the sort of delay playing and a lot of the kind of ostinatos that Roedelius is really good at. I'm not that guy, I mean, I was starting to try to make stuff that was kind of in that vein, but of course, because of my limitations, it ends up being something different, which is great. It's the way to do it, isn't it? So anyway, the Cocoquantus, I should really sort of show you what it does, like this. I really have loved this setup, and I think I've learned some key things. Picking instruments that behave tonally well with one another is just a joyful thing. The Panoptigon together with the RMI is delightful. The RMI together with the MS20 is delightful. The Echo and the old Mutron Phasor, they sit so well with the RMI. The distortion that comes from the preamp that's on the RMI is a good fit. And then the tape machine, obviously, it just sort of adds a certain extra kind of charmy, rusty quality to the whole proceedings. And then the mixing desk and all the subsequent effects fit really well. And so I just feel like I can't go wrong tonally. The RMI can only do the harpsichord, the piano and the lute. So you really are in a world of restrictions, which is always a good thing. So anyway, I had a few people come over and play this setup, which is very satisfying. My neighbour and friend Rob Berger, who actually introduced me to the Orchestron when he had one. And and also Eric Slick, who I've just met recently, who also lives in Nashville, who's just a tremendous, sweet and very talented guy. Became fast friends with him after doing a podcast with him. Here's what Eric managed to coax on his first session with this setup, which I was absolutely amazed to see. Take it away, Eric. Here's Rob Berger playing us out with a piano focused piece. I haven't really talked about the piano very much. And in fact, when I was working with Rob on this, I also had my dual Nagra Frippatronic set up in the studio room where I was, which allowed me to, have a more sheeny kind of loop sound on sound system. It's a very like hi-fi way to do it. Very different from the Cocoquantus and the Otari, which are quite grimy. Using the dual Nagra Frippatronics is just, it's like more like a Rolls Royce, So I wanted that for him, something that would have that high fidelity, so the piano could really kind of ring out and like have that charm. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And see you in the next one.